Ora passiamo velocemente all'intervento del responsabile del Dipartimento della Catalogazione della National Library of Israel, Ahava Cohen, che ci parlerà della Internationalizing, Cataloging Rules and the Change of Judaica. Partiamo? Grazie.
Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me to join you at your conference today. I'm going to be talking a little about the internationalization of cataloging rules. That's something that I know quite a bit about, both in my position here at the National Library of Israel as the head of cataloging, and for my work with international committees, such as the RDA Steering Committee, where I'm the European representative, and VIAF, where I'm the head of the council. The current version of the International Cataloging Rules is RDA, Resource Description and Access. RDA was first conceived as a replacement for the Anglo-American Cataloging Rules Second Edition Revised, but it quickly became clear that a standard which was first published in 1978 couldn't hope to describe the bibliographic universe of the 21st century. RDA is administered by two groups. The RDA board is responsible for setting the strategic direction for the development of RDA. They sign off on development plans, ensure good governance, monitor risks and finance, and ensure that the strategic plan is achieved. There are 6 geographic regions represented on the board: Africa, Asia, Europe, Latin America and the Caribbean, North America, and Oceania. For the most part, these geographic regions follow UN boundaries, but a country with close affiliation to a different region may request to join that region rather than the one that the UN assigned to them. The current board is made up of the 6 regional representatives, plus representatives of the 3 Anglo-American copyright holders and various non-voting members. The actual rules and guidelines are created by the RDA Steering Committee, the RSC. Again, the setup is based on the 6 US regions, but unlike the board, which doesn't delve into the nitty-gritty of the rules, 3 RSC regions have not yet determined who could represent them in looking at the minutiae of RDA guidelines. Therefore, at this point, only North America, Oceania, and Europe are represented on the RDA Steering Committee. EURIG, the European RDA Interest Group, represents Europe. Italy is part of the European region, and 4 Italian bibliographic agencies are members. Because of the provision allowing selected countries to switch out of UN-mandated regions, Israel is a member of EURIG, and the Israeli representative, me, is currently the EURIG representative to the RSC. That means I vote in meetings on behalf of European bibliographic agencies which have adopted RDA, shepherd change proposals from Europe through RSC processes, and because Europe is currently the most heterogeneous region in the RDA universe, I'm constantly pushing for internationalization of the standard. The RDA board understands how important internationalization is to the continued growth of the standard, and so, since 2019, has been actively working towards internationalization. In effect, the efforts began 11 years ago when the DMB, the German National Library, sat in on a joint steering committee meeting. The joint steering committee was the precursor to the RSC. Back then, it was only the Anglo-American copyright holders who made decisions, or quite literally had a seat at the table. A month after DMB was allowed to sit in, EURIG was founded, and a year later, the Germans joined the RSC as a voting member, representing themselves, not yet Europe as a whole. The focus of these early internationalization attempts was to promote subscriptions, and to a large extent, it worked. There are subscribers to the online RDA toolkit from over 65 countries on 6 continents. Another step towards internationalization was the creation of the RDA registry, where communities could translate elements, values, and definitions into their own languages, either as preparation for a full translation of RDA or as part of creating local documentation. Despite having many languages present, for a long time, the registry showed implicit bias as it couldn't correctly handle languages written right to left. Many libraries around the world, including the National Library of Israel, adopted the original version of RDA, which was based on the theoretical concept in IFLA's Functional Requirements family of documents. In 2017, a new IFLA conceptual model, IFLA LRM, the IFLA Library Reference Model, was released. This model also showed some implicit Anglo-American Christian bias. For example, the original examples for a one-day time span included 10 Adar 5755 as a way of referring in Romanized Hebrew and within the Hebrew calendar scheme to the time span that elapsed between 0 o'clock on the 1st of March 2015 and midnight on the 1st of March 2015. Of course, that's not correct. The Jewish calendar doesn't count days from midnight to midnight. After having this pointed out, the editors changed the example to read 10 Adar 5775 as a way of referring in Romanized Hebrew and within the Jewish calendar scheme to the time span that elapsed between nightfall on the 28th of February 2015 and nightfall on the 1st of March 2015. Still not exactly accurate, but close enough. Instead of annual meetings alone, the RDA steering committee has shifted towards quarterly meetings as a way of allowing more internationalization. That means that fewer things are discussed at each meeting, allowing European libraries time to read and to discuss proposed changes, translate the material back into their own languages for internal discussions, and then translate the results back into English to send to the European representative and give her time to collate all the responses with that of her own team. In 2018, the Israeli representative to Urig, who was at the time the backup European representative, was asked to prepare a report detailing her claims that the original version of the toolkit was rife with Anglo-American, Western, and Christian bias. The report was presented at the 2019 RSC in-person meeting in Santiago, Chile. And here we have another example of implicit Christian bias. She couldn't present her findings in person as the meeting began on Simchat Torah. The minutes of the meeting include details of pre-meeting discussion in which it's noted that the Israeli representative could join remotely, but instead of saying, if the meeting isn't held on a holiday, it says that she could join if she's not on a holiday, meaning a vacation. The Christians who wrote up the minutes didn't grasp the concept of a religious holiday on which people are prohibited from working and inserted the closest concept from their own experience. But in any case, after having read the draft report and consulted with the RDA board, the RSC also decided that Anglo-American foci had to be removed from the base toolkit. How do implicit Anglo-American, Western, and Christian biases play out in RDA? Those of you attending this conference and I have a common frame of reference through which we can look at examples, Hebraica and Judaica. Nearly every medium or large-sized library in the world holds resources in Hebrew, Yiddish, Ladino, or about Jews, and therefore many think they know how to deal with these resources without consulting specialty librarians, scholars, or librarians from the cultures which have produced those materials. The pre-internationalization toolkit shows us how very wrong they are. Let's start with the most upsetting example, misleading numbering. The Merriam-Webster dictionary defines misleading as to lead in a wrong direction or into a mistaken action or belief, often by deliberate deceit. Very pejorative. And yet the RDA definition of misleading numbering corresponds precisely to the pagination of the Talmud. The pagination of the Talmud was set by Daniel Bomberg in 1523, long before anyone thought of codifying cataloging rules for international use. Having worked with both members of the RSC and the JSC, I can assure you there was no intention to invoke the common anti-Semitic dog whistle of calling the Talmud false or misleading. It was just unfortunate. Even more unfortunate is that this problem still exists in the toolkit, even though complaints have been lodged for the past 5 years. Last year, the RSC founded a religions and RDA working group. The cataloger representing Judaism has been asked to push for a change. But internationalization has begun to have an impact. In the original toolkit, Books of the Bible was a section of the tools provided to catalogers. The list was available from 3 sources: the US, the French Canadians, and the Germans. Of course, the Bible they're talking about is the Christian Bible, not the Jewish one, though all 3 agencies admit that the titles might vary if you're not using the version they're working with. None admit that the order of books or even the decision of which books are considered biblical might change. In the original toolkit, the Germans were allowed to determine which books constituted the Old Testament, but Jews weren't. Does that sound like a problem to anyone else? That's something that had to be changed. In the new toolkit, the French, Canadian, and German lists have disappeared, and the American list is now explicitly just a list of the names in English, not the definitive list. It's not a perfect solution, but it's better than it was. Another problem is that people without a strong working knowledge of Hebrew formulated the rules for dealing with Hebrew grammar. The same problem exists for Yiddish, as indeed it does for many other languages, including common European ones. The rules were formulated in the 1970s and even earlier, and no one now part of the Anglo-American or Israeli Judaica cataloging world was consulted. For example, the original toolkit included instructions for dealing with the Hebrew definite article, hey hayidiyah. The instruction says to admit the article when it appears at the start of the name of a work, person, corporate body, or place. This instruction is contrary to Hebrew grammar, where you can't just start chopping off parts of words, and shows explicit English language bias. In addition, from just this instruction alone, a cataloger would end up making many mistakes. Should the hey be removed from the name Cohen, Ha-Cohen, as the instructions seem to state, Cohen and Ha-Cohen are 2 very different names. And in any case, it's a person's name. Hey at the start of a word isn't always a definite article in any case. Hachshara, training, is not ha-chshara. And even when the word does seem to start with a definite article, that's not, for the lack of a better word, definite. Ha-boker, that must be the morning, with the hey being a definite article, right? Well, unless the title is something like Ha-bokeru, is it morning? In which case the hey is interrogative and not an article at all. Talk about misleading. In the new internationalized version of the toolkit, several important changes have taken place. First of all, it's explicitly stated that these instructions are for Anglo-American catalogers doing their work in transcription and in English. Not Anglo-American, you may choose to treat the Hebrew definite article in a different way without violating the rules. But the main change can be seen from the breadcrumb line at the top of the page. The instruction is no longer part of the main body of RDA, but in a section called Community Resources. The Community Resources contains content that conforms to the RDA standard, but specific to a community rather than international in scope. Removing this content from base RDA makes the toolkit that much more friendly to a non-Anglophone community. At this point, the only material in the community resource section is Legacy Anglo-American, including the English language material, which was translated by the Finns as part of their full translation. In the future, any cooperative community which can assure the RSC that they can maintain content will be allowed to create RDA compliant instructions and vocabulary encoding schemes for the section, and catalogers of similar material will have access to local information and policies. There's still not a clear divide between what belongs in base RDA and what in the community resources section, in large part because of how hard it is for people to think about the world in terms different from their own. One example of these blind spots is the terminology chapter of the guidance section. Several communities have complained that the rules in this chapter are English-centric, but the predominantly monolingual members of the RSC don't think it's an internationalization issue, and so the struggle continues. Why is it so important that the international cataloging rules be internationalized? Well, for one thing, over 61% of WorldCat refers to non-English language resources. Also, a well-developed and well-maintained community resource section will support data exchange. I can understand the choices you've made in your records because I know what the Italian local rules are, and you understand my choices because you understand what the Israeli local rules are. Having this content moved out of base RDA and into community resources allows us to codify both the traditional Anglo-American practice on which RDA was originally based and local practices, which is a win-win. And allowing more communities to contribute content into the toolkit frees up resources for further development because we're not having to adapt all the time. We do it once, put it into the community resources, and then we can go on to other more important decisions. The main source of knowledge to meet the goal of internationalization and the even more important goal of developing RDA to serve us now and the future is all of you. If you're trying to catalog something, you can come up against a block because of the rules. If you have an idea for a proposal or for a discussion paper, or even just a fast track to make a small change to the RDA toolkit, please get in touch with me. Let's work together to translate our knowledge of different cultures and languages, our experience of working with Hebraica and Judaica, into making a better RDA. I would love to hear from you either now or in the future by mail, by WhatsApp, direct message on Twitter. It's always a pleasure to share knowledge with other people working in the field of Hebraica and Judaica. And once again, thank you very much for inviting me to your conference.
Thanks for your inspiring intervention, Mrs. Cohen, and sorry for the technical problems. Any question?
Se ci sono domande alla sala, appunto come avete visto la PowerPoint è collegata online. Prego,
Il microfono.
La faccio in italiano direttamente che mi è più semplice. Lo sguardo che noi abbiamo come catalogatori e come ovviamente lei come responsabile della catalogazione generale della Biblioteca Nazionale di Israele guarda principalmente agli Stati Uniti e all'Europa. Cosa ne è del problema dell'ebraismo, diciamo delle risultanze dell'ebraismo del Nord Africa e dei paesi dell'Est? Cioè dei paesi orientali, se la Biblioteca Nazionale di Israele come centro, diciamo, di raccolta di questo tema della catalogazione all over the world, che cosa ne è invece del resto del mondo?
Ahava, Dilate speaking. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hi. So Michaela Vitale posed the question. She is one of our cataloger. Michaela, ve la presento. Vitale è una delle catalogatrici del progetto Italia Books, per capire da dove viene la domanda. She is asking, National Library of Israel and his cataloging department is facing the cataloging question from people from the United States and from Europe. What about the cataloging point of view about North African and from Eastern Europe, from Yemen and from other Arabic countries?
Well, we are limited by the countries that will actually speak with Israel, obviously. But of those countries, we have quite a bit of cooperation with Egypt. We work with Morocco, United Arab Emirates, and as more Arab countries are beginning to be willing to speak to Israelis, we establish cataloging relationships with them as well, both on the international level and between the two libraries and the two countries.
Grazie, thank you.
Bene, allora un piccolo contributo, perché sicuramente ci riscusiamo in italiano per il problema tecnico, però per fare una piccola sintesi, ma veramente un bigname di un intervento che è stato articolatissimo, che dà proprio l'idea di come la National Library of Israel sia un punto di riferimento oggettivo. Diciamo che i punti che la dottoressa Cohen ha sviluppato è stato prima una descrizione degli standard di catalogazione di matrice americana pubblicati a partire dal 78, l'IRDA, e poi il concetto della Ewing, cioè della suddivisione per aree di intervento, in cui Israele rientra nell'area Europa e in cui appunto il progetto Italia Book si viene a collegare. Da questo la dottoressa ha specificato che l'RDA Board agisce da sempre verso la promozione dell'internazionalizzazione degli standards di catalogazione, agendo secondo 5 principi. Lo sviluppo e la creazione di standard deve essere applicabile a livello internazionale. Lo sviluppo e la creazione di standard deve coinvolgere e abbracciare un gran bacino di individui e di comunità. Lo standard deve riconoscere e rispettare i valori, la conoscenza e le pratiche locali. Lo standard deve portare ovviamente dei benefici generali globalmente. L'integrazione fra lo standard e le visioni globali deve essere sostenibile, cioè rispettoso fra l'altro delle identità delle singole aree. E poi la dottoressa ha fatto tutta una serie di esempi di catalogazione errata, e l'avete visto, seppure mi dispiace, l'avete visto piccolino, ma era quello il discorso che lei ha fatto, una numerazione fuorviante e catalogazioni di libri della Bibbia presenti solo negli archivi americani o franco-canadesi e tedeschi, i quali si riferiva esclusivamente si faceva riferimento al Nuovo Testamento e non al Pentateuco. Infine, un'altra questione riguardava la formulazione ovviamente della difficoltà della grammatica ebraica nelle regole di catalogazione, fatta da persone non esperte della lingua stessa. Per fortuna questo elemento si sta superando, e la community resource, cioè il concetto della interconnessione, come si vede col progetto Italia Book, fra aree diverse di intervento di catalogazione. Quindi la creazione di questa sezione Ewing di catalogazione ha portato importanti vantaggi. Infatti questo permette alle persone anche non di lingua inglese di avere un più facile accesso all'informazione, e calcolando che globalmente circa il 61% delle persone non è di madrelingua inglese, quindi c'è anche oltre l'inglese un'attenzione alle altre lingue fondamentali. In Europa sappiamo che la Commissione si muove con soprattutto inglese e francese, ma non solo. Quindi la creazione di una sezione ad hoc come la Community Resource permette agli utenti di contribuire attivamente al censimento di informazioni. Ora scusate, ma questo è proprio un bignami, mi permetterete, perché mi ha permesso di fare chiarezza anche per me seguirlo. Thank you very much. Bye. Sì. Sì, sì, Gianfranco Di Segni.
Sì, no, non è una domanda, è soltanto un chiarimento sulla questione grammaticale, molto interessante. Era sul problema della heia yedia, dell'articolo. Ma faccio un esempio, dico a parole mie quello che ha detto la dottoressa Cohen. L'articolo hei, ha, vuol dire l'articolo determinativo, la o i, la seconda dei casi. Per esempio, ha Torah vuol dire la Torah. Quando si fa l'alfabetizzazione bisogna alfabetizzare secondo la TAF di Torah, perché sennò verrebbero migliaia di volumi tutti sotto la lettera A. Però ci sono dei casi in cui il prefisso ha non è articolo, per esempio la parola akshara. La ha di akshara fa parte della parola, adesso non entro nelle questioni grammaticali, e quindi non è un articolo. Se il catalogatore non conosce l'ebraico, toglierebbe la ha e quindi sbaglierebbe, perché invece akshara va catalogato sotto a e non sotto akshara. Oppure un altro caso, aboker vuol dire il mattino, il prefisso ha è l'articolo il mattino, ma nell'espressione abokerhu la ha, la hei, non è l'articolo, ma è una preposizione interrogativa, che vuol dire abokerhu è mattino oggi. Allora in questo caso qui pure il catalogatore non può togliere la A e catalogare sotto Boker, perché sbaglierebbe, perché in questo caso è facente parte dell'espressione interrogativa a Bokeru. Questo era un esempio interessante che magari la gente che non è addetta ai lavori non ci pensa a quali sono i problemi. Noi in italiano e in inglese siamo abituati che se vediamo il manoscritto cataloghiamo sotto M manoscritto, oppure the book cataloghiamo con l'alfabeto della B di book. In questi casi qui l'ebraico, che è più complesso dal punto di vista grammaticale, non permette questo.
Benissimo. Ci sono altre domande? Another question? Thank you. Bye.
Bye.